Well, hello everyone, welcome to our sixth and final installment of our online event series for Lean Startup Co. in 2023. My name is Ben Hafele. I'm the managing director here at Lean Startup Co. And I'm super excited to introduce Eric Ries, who is our founder at Lean Startup Co. and also the creator of the Lean Startup movement. So Eric, welcome.
Thanks very much.
Fantastic. So as people are getting settled in, I always like to give you a perspective of kind of where we're coming from. And so a lot of you have been to our previous events and you've seen our delivery team in our previous online events this year. Today, you're going to be talking with Eric and I. And I wanted to tell you how we came to be in possession of all these stories and anecdotes and best practices that we're going to share with you today. And that's because over the past years, we have worked with hundreds of companies and thousands of teams at those companies to implement Lean Startup at scale. It's great work. It's really exciting work. It's impactful work. And we do it in three ways. Number one is our training package, which is courses and workshops. We're going to tell you about an exciting new course later today that Eric built himself. But in those workshops, we do one of two things. We're either introducing Lean Startup to a new group of people that have never used Lean Startup before to actually apply, build, measure, learn to real project work at the client. And what's great about that is they emerge from the workshop, which is like either 2 half days or 2 full days with a backlog of experiments that they can run after the workshop. And so that's one of the things that we've been doing a lot of. The other thing, which is great and kind of a sign of the times, is we work a lot with workshops with companies that are already using Lean Startup. They already have a practice, and we're just supercharging their existing practice of Lean Startup. And that's been really cool to see. So we're instilling, new tools and frameworks that they're currently not using, up to and including now third-party vendors and resources, and how to use AI to improve learning cycle time, which is really exciting. So that's our workshops and courses. Also, our pilot program is one of our main things that we do, and that's where we're actually making the rubber hit the road on. It's a workshop plus 10 weeks of coaching, where we've actually got teams from client organizations that are applying build, measure, learn to an initiative to create a body of evidence, and then making a pivot, persevere, kill recommendation to a senior executive at the end. So that's really powerful for 2 reasons. Number one, you get real project outcomes. You go faster. Maybe you pivot when you didn't even know you could do that at your company. Or a lot of times a success is parking an initiative that's just going nowhere and working on the next thing in backlog because you've proven that you shouldn't be working on that as a company. So real project outcomes, but also just instilling the ability of those teams that are in the pilot program to do this without us or to do it without external support. So we're capability builders at Lean Startup Co. We're here to make sure that you can do this without us one day. And so the pilot program is a great way of instilling that capacity in your organization. And then the third and final thing over on the right here is our custom framework design and implementation. And this is just a sign that, Lean Startup's growing up. We're not just this bunch of mavericks out there who are operating in the shadows anymore, right? And so this is where we've done enough piloting where senior executives say, all right, we're in. We get it. This is awesome. This is a much more efficient way of working. And so we're weaving in Lean Startup to their business as usual, which is really cool. We have a proprietary program design framework that we use for this, where we make specific design decisions about that framework to make sure that it's compatible with existing kind of mothership organizational culture, processes, and governance. I would say be wary of anyone that says there's one way of doing Lean Startup that's going to work at every company as business as usual. We found that that's not true, and there's some really important decisions to be made to make sure that it takes. So those are the 3 main ways that we've been helping companies here over the last couple of years. It's been really exciting. And that's how we have come to be in possession of all these stories that we're about to share with you. So with that, let's hop into our conversation. So Eric, question for you. I actually got this one from one of our clients a couple weeks ago, and it's a great one because it's all about first principles. It was, look, if I have to explain Lean Startup to someone, like I'm at the water cooler and like, hey, I heard about Lean Startup. What is it? And they like, how do you describe that? So what is Lean Startup and why does it matter to somebody that has no idea what it is?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks everybody for joining us and for supporting us all year. It's been incredible to be doing Lean Startup in these very interesting times.
Yeah.
So lean startup is a lot of things to a lot of people. And so, context is everything. So I'm trying to take the question really seriously.
Hmm.
Um, in the context of an existing enterprise, lean startup is really just a more scientific way to make product, team, and resource allocation decisions. That's probably where I would start with somebody who's like completely new to it. And it's interesting, people on this webinar, probably some of you are lean startup old timers and have heard this a million times. But the world of business is so vast, even with the lean startup book having sold millions of copies, and even with for a lot of people for whom this is old hat. Every day, practically, I interact with people. I get emails from people who discovered it today. Somebody picked up the Lean Startup book yesterday, probably is on this webinar right now because they saw it on LinkedIn and they're like, "Oh, I just read that book. How cool that's a thing." So the world of business is really vast, and it's important if we want to bring science and and a more humane way of making decisions into our organizations, and we got to think from first principles, as your friend was asking about. And it's really this: when we're doing something innovative or new, then we're by definition operating within conditions of extreme uncertainty. Because when we're doing something new, it's by definition not what we did before, or we're doing something new because the environment around us has changed. We're living through some kind of disruption and the world's becoming more unstable. And so therefore, we can't make accurate forecasts. So Lean Startup is a guide to decision making and action in those kinds of circumstances when we have to figure things out for ourselves. And really, that's all the practices: build, measure, learn, the pivot, innovation accounting. All the specific practices of Lean Startup are just how do we survive in a situation like that, where it's really difficult to give people intermediate status updates when we don't know what the goal is. It's really difficult to say whether we're close to it. When we're dealing with exponential change and we're on the long flat part of the hockey stick, the flat part of the hockey stick looks like dead right up until it hockey sticks. So if you're on that part, how do you sustain political capital? How do you sustain momentum, team morale, when you're on track towards something that will be successful in the future, but the evidence is not visible in the vanity metrics quite yet? And then the third kind of thing that's really critical under conditions of extreme uncertainty is just how do we as a team get all the same facts into all the heads of all the people? Companies are notoriously bad about this. When we break into factional departments, I've been in many companies where the marketing department, the engineering department, QA department, customer service, they all have different beliefs about what's happening right now. Forget what happened in the past. Forget what's going to happen in the future. Just right now, is this working or not? Are customers using our product and do they like it or not? You'd be astonished how much cognitive dissonance is possible when people are not on the same page. And if we don't have the same facts, there's no way we can make any kind of strategy decision that makes any kind of sense. So a lot of the practices around analytics, around metrics, about split testing, scientific experimentation, like really this is just trying to debug this fact of the human condition that we all use motivated reasoning and we all see what we want to believe. We have to undo that. We got to use science. That's really the time-tested way to get the truth into the thick skulls of human beings. And so when we as a team all know what the truth is, then we're able to act in concert with a high degree of performance.
Wow. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I guess one of the things that we've been talking about lately is when people say, "Hey, there's this new thing people are doing, and they're calling it lean startup," and it's not kind of what we had in mind 6 or 7 years ago when we said it was lean startup. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's tricky because there's two related problems when something becomes a movement and people gets really popular.
Yeah.
The first problem is lean washing, where they're like, "Oh, I see this company's all into lean jargon. I'll just slap lean startup terminology over the same BS we were doing it before and now say that we're lean." I've seen multiple companies that actually they go through the full hype cycle around lean startup. They've never heard of it. They get really excited about it. They slap the label on a bunch of stuff. It doesn't work. Then they get disillusioned about it. And it's like they go through the whole cycle and they've never actually done lean startup even one time through the whole process, and I've seen companies go through multiple cycles. So they get excited about it again, new generation. It's just like, so the first thing is, just because someone says something is lean startup doesn't make it so. The words are not magic incantations and they don't magically. And personally, I don't care if you call it lean startup or something else. I worked once with a group of Google product managers. Google has such a strong not invented here syndrome in their culture that they literally would come over to my house. This is quite a few years ago when Google was a little smaller than it is now. But they would come over to my house and they'd be like, "Okay, can we talk about how do you lean startup at Google?" When they first showed up, I was like, "What do you mean talk about it? Just go do it." They're like, "No. We can't let anybody at Google know that it's from the outside. We have to make it seem like an internal Google. I was like, whatever you need to do, it's fine. So we like created alternate vocabulary and alternate ways. I mean, whatever the things are about what you do, not about what you say. But the other thing that's really funny is I was at great pains. You know, Lean Startup's been out for a while now. This book came out in 2011, and the movement started before that. So we've learned a lot since then. And people, I try to be really clear in the book and in all my writings that Lean Startup is whatever works. Like that, it's a scientific framework. So if something works, if we can prove that it works, if it helps people using, you know, in the outcomes that we care about, then we can adopt it into Lean Startup, no problem. There's nothing heretical about that. You won't be excommunicated. That's not bad. It's actually good to do that. And same with importing ideas from other movements. So the original Lean Startup framework was very much intentionally built to be compatible with design thinking and Six Sigma and Agile and customer development and Toyota Production System and software craftsmanship and DevOps. And I mean, we could do this all day. I spent a lot of time not just reading those books and understand the intellectual frameworks of them, but also spending time with the leaders of those other movements to say, look, can we work together, big tent? Let's actually help everybody in the organization work together. So the idea that like, just because we were doing it, you know, a certain way in 2013 or whatever, and now it's 10 years later, someone wants to do it a different way, and therefore it's not Lean Startup, that's silly. So what we have to do, no matter what, this is really a movement about thinking for yourself, you know, right? Like we can give you all the tips and techniques and best practices that you want, and so can other people. And yet at the end of the day, you have to actually observe, you know, one of the old Toyota Production Systems sayings in Japanese, Genshi Genbutsu, go and see for yourself, is one of the most important things I ever learned from the Production System, which is like, if a team says they're doing Lean Startup, don't take their word for it. Go ask them specifically, what are you doing? You know, I always ask people, what did you learn? And how do you know? And you'd be shocked how often the answer is nothing. And because I say so. And it's like, okay, that's someone who says that is not, I don't care what else they can use with jargon perfectly. They can quote chapter and verse, whatever. But if they're not learning anything, if they're not putting themselves in a position to fail, if they don't have rigorous evidence for the claims that they're making, then it's not science and it's not Lean Startup.
Yeah. Wow. That makes a lot of sense. And I think another thing that kind of came out in what you just said for me is that it is a system, right? So it is not just something for teams to do. I think you mentioned that in our 2021 summit that we had, right? It's not just pixie dust that you sprinkle on teams and everything works out great, right? Because one of the worst things that can happen is that you have a high functioning team at, let's say, at a large company, right? High functioning internal startup team that's out there running experiments and generating this body of evidence, and they go in and they make a pivot recommendation to a senior VP or whoever, and the senior VP says, what are you talking about? I don't know what a pivot is. How come you didn't just go build the thing that I told you to build, right?
Yeah.
And so
I don't know if I told this story in our life. I don't think I did. I'm almost at risk of repeating myself, but I guess people are new to the webinar, so if I repeat myself, it's okay.
Yeah.
I was working with a team, and I'll never forget this. It was like such a crazy situation. It was at a huge company. They were at a mandatory 3-day offsite workshop about Lean Startup. So they were subpoenaed. You know, they were forced to be there. It was not their choice to be in this thing. And they worked for one of the most notorious performance-oriented, like hard-ass bosses in the whole company. He had a huge P&L. He was like super performance-oriented, and everything was his way or the highway. I could see that he was a very difficult person to work for. But, you know, somebody had decided they have to do this thing. I don't think it was him. It was someone higher up in the organization. I don't know. I don't know the backstory of how they get there in this. So anyway, so we spent 3 days working on it, and they had all these taboos of like, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. But we really worked through that. So look, just ignore all the taboos. Like, what's right? You're a shareholder. You're a customer, right? You have a duty of care to this organization. So what would be the right thing to do? And they developed this whole thing where instead of building these big multi-million-dollar programs, they're going to do a small experiment. They're going to prove a different way of working with customers. I won't get into the details of what the project was because it'd be too obvious what company I'm talking about. But it was a way better plan. I was super excited. And then they get the shock news. I didn't even know this. At the end of the session, on the 3rd day, there's going to be a report out to the big boss. And they're like, oh no, the big boss is going to be here. And then we get the even worse news. Oh no, the big boss is on vacation. They're like, oh, phew, he's not going to be here. Like, no. He is telepresencing in from his vacation to receive your report out. And they're like, oh my gosh, like this is pre-pandemic. This is before Zoom and everything. This was like a huge deal for him to do that. That was like a terrifying circumstance. And I'll never forget as long as I live. They do the report out and they're like, these are like grown adults afraid of it. They're acting, cowering in fear. They do the report out and they're like, he's going to hate it. He's going to yell at us. It's going to be terrible. But they're like, listen, boss, we want to do this thing. We think this is a better way of working with customers. We want to run the experiment to get the data. They go. He's not saying a word. He's like stone-faced looking at them off through the video. At the end of their presentation, he says, yeah, I like this, but how come we're not rolling this out? How come this hasn't been rolled out already? When's it going to be at 100% deployment? I mean, it's just like went from like total skepticism, I hate it, to like I'm going to fire you because you haven't gone 120% on it. And I really had so much respect for the team because they were so shocked. And it would have been so easy, politically speaking. It would have been awesome for them to just be like, yeah, we're doing it, boss. Go.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, no, listen, boss, with all due respect, 5 minutes ago when we thought you were going to hate this idea, we thought the right thing to do was to experiment and see evidence. And now that we know that you love the idea, we still think the right thing to do is experiment and get the evidence. And the look on his face was totally priceless. I could tell that no one had ever said anything remotely like that to him. And on the one hand, he was miffed because he had given them a directive that they were disobeying. He was like ready to take their head off. And you could see the moment when it clicked in. He's like, oh, that actually makes sense. Yeah, do that. And he signed off the vacation. They were like, did he just say yes? Like, it was like they were totally stunned. But that's how this works. If you can get literacy in the basic concept through the organization, you're able to accomplish things that no individual team acting as a renegade can accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so great. I guess pre-lean startup code days for me, I had a similar story where a report out to senior executive, and the senior executive said, "That's great, but I need you to add this big feature." Right? Like everything you did is great, but add feature X. And there's a tension in the air. And Jason, who was the team lead, said, Bob, that's a great idea. We're going to add that to our experiment backlog, and we're going to go test feature X just like we're going to test everything else.
Yeah.
So similar situation. And there was this tension in the room. What's Bob, the senior VP, going to say? And Bob said, yeah, I guess that makes sense. You're right. And so
yeah. And you have to be aware of the fact that in a lot of companies, unfortunately, experiment is a bad word. Experiment just means we're not really going to do it.
Yeah. So
basically, companies have like the things they're actually going to do, and then that's like 10% of the things on the backlog or on the plan for the year. And then there's the 90% of things that we're going to pretend to do that are like to satisfy some political mandate or some other BS. And I'm joking. Sometimes it's not 10, 90, maybe it's 90, 10 the other way, but like a lot of companies, it's at least 50-50. And so like a classic dodge of someone tells you to do something and you don't want to do it is like, rather than doing it, let's experiment to just run a pilot program to see if it's a good idea. And like, that doesn't really mean we're going to experiment. That just means we're going to stick it into the political nonsense, 3 milestones away. There's something that like just to park it somewhere to claim that we're going to do it. So that's why when you're talking about how every company requires a certain level of customization of this, these are the kind of cultural details you have to take into account when you're doing the organizational design side of this transformation. You can't just ignore the PTSD and the conditioning that people have from years of the culture being a certain way. So really understanding how things actually work in the company for real, not what it says in the manual, not what it says on the org chart. Like, what is it actually like to work there? That's always the foundation of figuring these things out.
It's so important. And one of the things that we do on every engagement is we test language with our, the people that we're working with before we roll anything out. And so we found out that in one of our clients, and some of them are on the line right now, the word accountability was a trigger word. Like, oh, you can't use the word accountability. Okay, what should we use, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like we know what we mean. And so we talk a lot about the order of operations of like which assumptions should you test first, right? So for example, test your value hypothesis before your growth hypothesis. And that, so basically, how do you know you're testing in the right order? And so we said the order of operations. And they said, well, we already call that internally the order of confirmation. Okay, great. Call it that. Like it doesn't, so it's basically adapting what we're doing to every situation.
Yes.
I guess just to pull on a thread here, and we've got a couple things in the comments that are coming through that I want to address as well. You mentioned teams that say they're doing stuff and they're not really learning, right? They say, and this has actually come up in a lot of conversations that I've had recently, where teams are just leaders are sick of their team saying, well, we're learning a lot, right? Like, we've been working on this for 2 years and we're learning a lot. And so this is a diagram, a little tool that our audience can use to think about how lean startup works at an established companies. At an established company where you've got teams that are running build, measure, learn at the bottom there, and they're producing validated learning. And that's a key term. And that's not just any learning, right? That's validated learning. Could you maybe expand on what validated learning is and how it's different from just learning?
Yeah, there's no, like, we all know that when a team is scraping the bottom of the barrel of excuses for why they didn't perform, the last one you pull out, and you've like absolutely run out of excuses. It's you like, but boss, I know we set $4 million on fire, and I know we said we'd have 1 million customers, but we only have 3. And I know we said this, and I know we said, but we learned so much. And so, like, again, the conditioning, we all have the conditioning to just shut those things down. That's an excuse. It's not real. And we have to find a way around that in order for this to work, because the number one lesson of science is if you can't fail, you can't learn. And the essence of competitive advantage in a situation of high uncertainty is whoever learns the fastest wins. So, you can deride it all you want. In fact, I get flack sometimes. I just got this the other day from a really very successful entrepreneur who was like, I don't like the idea that you call startups an experiment. I think it's better to just say you're building a product and not call it an experiment, not say that the goal is performance, not the goal is learning. And I was like, well, you can call it whatever you want. Like the thing people don't seem to understand, you could say your startup is not an experiment if you want. You can say your goal is to get customers. You can say whatever you want, but the reality of the situation is, by definition, again, this is not like some grand insight, just like you look at the definitions, just what is the fact of the situation? A startup is an experiment, whether you admit it or not. And success is what you learn, whether you admit it or not. So that's really the key, is to rescue learning from this like intangible excuse-based nonsense to a scientific framework. So validated learning is learning that comes with evidence. And then as soon as you say that, people are like, well, how could you possibly have evidence? I'll never forget this. I was sitting with a lean startup, like an innovation coach consulting firm once that I was meeting, and I was explaining this to them, and they're like, but how could you ever put a number on learning? As if it was like ridiculous. I was like, what are you talking about? You're asking the executives to put a number on it every day by paying you all this money to run these teams for them. You don't think they want to know what the ROIs are like? Oh, the ROI could never be calculated. It is an intangible. It's just like, well, no wonder you're going to be like, first of all, you're going to be fired. And second of all, this company's never going to do any innovation. Like, come on, the learning has to be applied. It's like if someone said, I'm doing science, but I don't ever put my theories to the test. It's like, is that science?
Yeah.
And more importantly, like as a society, imagine if we only did science in the lab, but we never translated it into anything useful. So like, yes, we've learned the science of antibiotics in the lab, but we don't actually manufacture antibiotics and use them to save people's lives. You'd be like, something's gone horribly wrong here. So validated learning is simply applied, the learning applied to something. So for example, classic corporate nonsense speak is to look at a graph that's going all up and down like this, and you've got arrows that point like at each peak and each thing, and be like, we did this on this date, and look, the numbers went up afterwards. And it's like, see, therefore, what we did caused that. In Latin, they have it's a name. It's so common. It's a named fallacy. I think it's post hoc ergo propter hoc. After it, therefore, because of it. So that's not valid reasoning. What we need to do is something like this. We go cohort by cohort. So it's like, look, everybody who signed up between this date and this date, what was the performance over time of that cohort? And then the next one, and then the next one, and the next one. And if over time, the percentage of customers in each cohort that do a certain action, if that changes over time, it's a much more solid inference that we did something that made a change. In fact, I'll never forget, I was working on a product once many years ago that had a 1% conversion rate, which is super common in like e-commerce online. A lot of 1% conversion rate for a lot of reasons is one of the very common bedrock facts of the universe. And it was really weird. I never thought of this before because I was doing it cohort by cohort. I was bringing in 100 customers every single day. And on average, we had 1% of them would purchase the product. And at a certain point, I started to get paranoid. I'm like, gosh, are today's customers like on a conference call with yesterday's customers being like, okay, everybody, like, okay, 1% of you bought it. Because like, you're like, by random chance, what are the odds that it would be so consistent? I was back when I used to think of metrics as kind of random, forgetting the key principle that metrics are people too. And so like when you see a behavior like that, that emerges naturally from multiple independent groups of people, you start to say, wait a second, maybe there's something like not just a fantasy about that, maybe there's something real. And that's when I started to appreciate that if something's been like, if you have been doing, we were doing a cohorts for 6 months at solid 1% conversion rate, every single freaking day, it was driving me crazy because we're making the product better this whole time and the conversion rate's not changing. When we finally figured out product changes that made that percentage change, it started to make, you're like, wow, that's actually real learning. Okay, now we figured something out. Like, it's not just some fantasy that I'm making up to make it seem like what I'm doing makes sense. We've actually discovered bedrock truth here.
Yeah.
That's validated learning.
Yeah, love it. And if you can say, here's what we've validated, here's what we've invalidated, which is just as important, right?
Yep.
One of the things that we, when we're taking people through our pilot program, we're taking teams through our pilot program. Oftentimes they're like, well, we invalidated these really critical assumptions, but like, we're not going to tell executives.
Oh yeah. Because
what we invalidated those. I'm like, well, why not? Those are some of the biggest learnings you have. Like, you found out what's not true about customers.
Oh yeah. And the classic one is like I was working with a company and there's a team that had $100 million budget to do something or other, and they spent $1 million, and they discovered that this idea was like I can't even describe how incomprehensibly bad the idea was. It was like not going to work for like 20 different reasons, but it was like it was an executive pet project that the execs loved. That's why they had authorized this huge budget. And they were like, I was sitting in the meeting where they're like talking to like a finance person. They're like, we need to tell the executives to cancel this project. And the finance person was like, what? You're saying you wasted $1 million? And I was like, no, guys, you did not waste $1 million. You just saved $99 million. That could pay for a lot more experiment. And the finance person was like, what are you talking about? Yeah. We wasted, like, the finance person could not see this problem, which is why this company had a major financial waste problem, because like throwing good money after bad was considered the best practice. So it was really hard for the team to have the courage to overrule the finance person, go back to the executives and say, listen, thank you for this opportunity, but here's the data. And our conclusion is this is a bad idea. What's your conclusion? And I had prepped with those executives in particular. This is why like training the executives is as important as training your teams. We had trained the execs to receive this information and understand it in a different way. And so instead of yelling at the team, they were like, oh, that's good. Congratulations. Good job. You just saved us a lot of money. And that, like, once you scale up that kind of practice, that's where the real like financial savings come in, because it's not just this is not like a work harder, don't work harder, work smarter kind of thing like that. You get those benefits too. Yeah. But this is where you get the like dramatic benefits of like, we don't have these endless projects that drag on and just become a black hole of money, losing, political nonsense like that. To purge even one of those projects from your system will pay for all the rest of the stuff you want to do 10 times over.
Totally. I mean, one of the things we just see time and time again is that one of the biggest problems with innovation at big companies is that it's overfunded.
Yeah.
And I mean that.
It's underfunded.
Absolutely. And so things that should be getting, $10,000 are getting $1 million. And it's like taking your big check as a startup too early, right? And so if you want
to see proof of this thesis, just read TechCrunch every day.
Yeah.
And make a note of like the highest, earliest investment rounds you see, and then just make a note to check back in 18 months how those companies doing. Like, it won't take you very long to find these companies that just die from overfunding. It's actually really it's really sad. And part of the problem is that Lean Startup obviously comes from the Silicon Valley entrepreneurial community, but not everybody who can raise that kind of money practices this discipline. And we've even had cases of fraud and all kinds of other bad stuff going on lately because people are more than happy to just spend the money.
Yeah.
Just to make it more concrete, maybe what you're talking about. Executives not knowing how to allocate money correctly. I'll tell a story that I was working with a CEO of a multinational company and their top executive team. So I don't know, doing a workshop for like 300 people. I don't remember how many hundreds of people there were there. Everyone who had to report into the CEO and then all those people. So it was like a huge global executive staff. And I had asked, the workshop was in the morning. In the afternoon, I said, in the morning, could I work with some of your teams? And one of the teams told me the funniest story. They were doing this pilot program. They were really into Lean Startup. They like really understood the principle. And they had done this program where they had opened up these micro stores in the lobbies of buildings across us. They picked a certain city and they'd gone, I don't remember how many, they opened up, 100 stores or something. And they are tracking the economics and basically like the cost to open a store was like $3,000, and the ROI was really good. And so they were like asking me how they should do to plan their next experiment, pivot or persevere. We're kind of going through the data. I'm like, guys, this is really A plus. Like, good job. They spent a couple $100,000 of the company's money, and like they had a really good initial MVP to show for it. I was like, this is great. We got to double down. What's next? And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, this data. And I'm looking at the data. I'm like, God, this data is a little old. What have you been doing since then? And they're like, what do you mean? And I was like, wait. And I was like, okay, emergency, rewind. What's going on? Oh yeah, this data is from last year. What you've been doing since then? We're waiting for funding. I'm like, what do you mean waiting for what funding? They're like, well, I was like, how could this be? I'm like really taking it out on the team. They're like, what the heck happened here? When you find something that works, opportunity is a time-limited, perishable resource. You've got to double down right then. You can't. They're like, well, but here's what happened. We showed it to to the execs, and they said, oh, this is great. We want to do more. What's your budget request? They had spent, I don't remember the numbers now. They spent $300,000 and they wanted $600,000 now to go do the next, to double it. Basically, I'm a big fan of doubling the size of the experiment when you can. And the execs, finance had finance to come talk to them about it. Finance said, okay, this is great. We just need to understand the total opportunity here. So how many locations are available for this program nationwide? And they were like, okay, there's 3,000 locations where we could do this. They're like, great, cost $3,000 per location. You can see where this is going. They're like, okay, so you need $9 billion to run this program. Got it. And they're like, no, we just want our 600. And finance like, thanks, see you later. And finance had run up the flagpole a plan to give them like $400 million or something crazy. And of course, now that's like stuck in the company's budgeting bureaucracy, political, whatever. We've gone through 2 annual funding cycles since this experiment was done, where they couldn't decide whether it was worth investing $400 million. And you're shaking your head, right? Yeah. So I laid this out for the CEO and all the top execs, and they were so pissed at me. I can't even tell you how angry everybody was, because the CEO heard this story and was like, who did that? I can't, that happened in my company. I want this fixed. And he was just like, whoever this is, I want that team. I want the $600,000. Like, I'm approving the budget right now, blah, 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 blah. And like, you're so mad. And he storms out, it's like, whatever. And like 10 different execs came up to me and said, that is not cool. I know who you're talking about. I know what project that was. And they shouldn't have done this. And the funny part is it was 10 different execs talking about 10 different teams.
Yeah.
So like, how widespread was this in that company? Super widespread. And this is the problem. The CEO and the execs think this is an individual problem. The CEO is like, whose head do I need to have? Right? He's like mad. It's like, look in the mirror, buddy. You're the one who set up the system that does the budgeting this way. If you don't like the outcome, change your behavior and then set up the system properly. You'll be able to do this properly organization-wide.
Yeah. So it's a great story. It's a tragic one, right? But it's super helpful. I guess we're to the point now where when we get called to help out and help build capability at a company, sometimes people say, well, just train our teams. Don't bother the executives. They're busy. And we just say, no, we're not going to do it, because it's not going to create any impact to just train teams unless we also train the executives that those teams are going to report out to. And so precisely for that reason, Eric.
I once worked with a company that trained, I literally, by executive mandate, we train every single executive above a certain level and up, with one exception. CEO himself would not do the training. It was just like the message that sends to the company about where this, I was just like, you're shooting yourself. You spent a lot of money on this program, but you are shooting yourself in the foot. And as that proved to be true. But I feel like we're telling all these negative stories. The flip side of it is, this is not, people act like this is mysterious. Like, how do you get it to take? How do you get, my culture is so messed up. How do we fix it? Like, there is a playbook for this. And if you get it right, accountability, process, culture, people in that order, the startup way diagram, if you've seen that from the book, like,
totally.
The reason why Ben and I are so confident in these methods, we've seen it work. And when it works, it's really magical. So it's not just about obviously the financial performance and the ROI, in tough times, especially people want to know that there's a financial case to this. And it's like, look around, man, where today's financial performance is because of yesterday's good innovation decisions that people made. So if you want to plant those seeds for the future, get to it. But also the impact that it has on the human beings involved. Like some of these stories, like the bureaucracy and the politics is so soul crushing. People come to work at your organization because they thought they're going to be able to change the world for the better by doing the thing that your company does. And when that's repeatedly thwarted, like it's sad and it's frustrating. And yet when you unlock that performance, when you unlock the true creativity and spirit, the soul inside all those people that already came to work for you, it's a transformative thing. So
Yeah.
The upside is totally worth the pain of having to deal with all this politics stuff.
It's so true. And we talk about the suit of armor that people learn they have to put on, right? Yep. It's like, well, I'm not going to be innovative because I know what happens when I have an idea, or I know what happens when I'm excited about, this initiative. That's
it's vulnerable. It hurts when you do that, and people learn to stop doing it. But
totally. I also will say, just for anyone that's looking at this little tool, this little diagram that we have here on the screen, and you think executives, I got to go talk to my entire C-suite and all the VPs and everything. In our pilot program, the minimum number of executives for that pilot program is 1. So if we have one executive who is who's an early adopter and says, yeah, I'd be willing to pilot this, and you've got a team of maybe 3 to 5 or something like that, that is enough to start generating proof points. And for those of you that have seen our previous webinars, our previous content that we've had earlier in the year, we basically recommend starting with early adopters. So what do we mean by that? We mean that in your company, there's an internal adoption curve for Lean Startup. Just like there's an external adoption curve for your company's products and services, there's an internal adoption curve for this new way of working. So don't try to go and tell everyone that Lean Startup's going to be great and try to convince everyone across the adoption curve that they should be into Lean Startup. Find those innovators and early adopters, and most specifically, one early adopter executive, and one or a couple teams, and do a pilot, right? And that pilot then is what demonstrates that way of working, that new way of working at your company. And so we call it the earned faith model. So rather than the forced faith model, which is go out and spread the word and get everybody to buy in, right? Which doesn't work at a big company. Start with early adopters and prove that it works. That way you don't have to sell it to anyone. People will say, wow, we went fast, or we pivoted, or we parked an initiative. We spent $1 million to save 99 million, right? Those stories then do the convincing. So then the early majority, the late majority, and on, then they adopt it because they see how it works. And that's a really important point, right? So there was a question in here about, how do you get started at a company? You don't have to get buy-in from everyone. As a matter of fact, we'd recommend you not do that. Just find one executive and a couple teams and do a pilot. Call it a pilot. Say, we're going to do a pilot and see how this works in our company. By the way, it's going to work, right? But they don't know that. And when it does work, then you can say, hey, does anybody else want in on this? And they do, because results speak for themselves.
Yeah. I will say, if you look at the vast middle of middle and upper level managers, innovation people think they're really recalcitrant and difficult people, by their DNA, but it's actually not the case. I mean, there are those people, but most of the people are just trying to do a good job, and they're very results oriented. And the issue is just they've been conditioned that results come from performing a certain set of rituals and tasks. And they've been burned when they've taken a leap of faith on some innovation thing in the past and it's blown up in their face. That doesn't happen. When they do the regular stuff, that doesn't happen. The innovation stuff tends to blow up in a way that's painful and personal and gets you in trouble. So because the good news is that because they're results oriented, they can be swayed the way that Ben is talking about. And it's very powerful when you get that right. The problem is that a lot of innovation consultants, frankly, consultants are good at this in every stripe. They're actually trying to avoid being judged by results. That's how you rack up the great consulting fees. So, and that's true for internal change agents too, like people who get excited about some new thing. They often will go out of their way to avoid the accountability of putting it to the test. And so not only is it just the right thing to do, just because we're trying to build a scientific theory here, of course we should be evidence-based, it also builds a lot more credibility than you might be used to when you've tried to evangelize or advocate for stuff in the past. When you advocate with results, you advocate with evidence. It's not a silver bullet doesn't magically convert people, but like you will find that when you put that signal flare up, people who care about that kind of stuff will come to you.
Yes.
And I've been shocked, and my innovation partners inside organizations over the years have been really shocked who comes out of the woodwork when they find out this is going on. And it's because people wear the armor at work, because people fake their lack of creativity in order to fit in most organizations, which is like crazy when you think about it. We're like paying people to pretend to be less creative than they are. Like, what does that say about our company and its culture?
Yeah.
Because of that, you will often be very surprised who is willing to sign up for this kind of evidence-based experimentation. And you'll also be really surprised who won't sign up for it. A lot of companies employ a futurist or some kind of innovation person, or they have an innovation lab or some other nonsense thing where like people just spout off pronouncements about the future, but they don't do any work.
Mm-hmm.
Those people are not going to be excited about this, right? They're not going to. So don't keep an open mind. Like, create the program, create the place where people who want to work this way can appear, and then let reality show you what's going to happen next. It's pretty interesting.
It is. And I see there's a comment from Matthew over here that says people hate change, right? And that's true, but they also love results. They also love being creative, being innovative, and making the world a better place, right? Serving customers. And they get over their fear of change when they see that they can work in a new way. And that's proven in their company through a pilot, right? Through trying it out. So
if you look at the psychology literature, by the way, people do not hate change. They hate involuntary change. They hate the world being changed on them when they have no agency over the change. That is cruel. So like the difference between I'm moving out of my house because I found a better house,
yeah.
and the difference between I'm being evicted from my house because, something bad happened. You might say, well, people hate leaving their house. It's like, that's not true. They don't like one of those scenarios they like a lot. The other scenario they don't like a lot. So the key, when we move beyond pilots and into broad scale transformation, the key is to really think through the feeling of agency that the individual people involved have. And most companies handle this very badly at the middle manager layer, where middle managers are the people in business who are cursed with just enough authority to be held accountable for results, but not enough authority to change the way that the work is done. So they have to execute to a defined playbook, and they have to have faith that the playbook will produce the results. Otherwise they get in trouble, and it's really not fair. So like that's like a very difficult job. And I have learned to have tremendous respect for middle managers, as much as we like to complain about them.
Sure.
So like when companies do transformation, they often just dump a lot of extra work on those people and say like, oh, and also, by the way, while you're doing all this other stuff and making sure nothing goes wrong and making sure there's no variability and making sure also tell your people to be more innovative. And they're like, come on, man. Give me a break. So you can't be thoughtless about that. You have to really take into account the psychology and the pain and suffering of the actual people involved and make it a win for them. And I've done that now with a bunch of companies, and again, you'll be surprised who can become an advocate and even a zealot for the new way of working if you give them the opportunity.
Absolutely. And I'll flash this back up. I recently reread Crossing the Chasm, and I was reminded that these are psychographic segments. This is the way people think. It doesn't say like the accounting department are the laggards or the whatever department. Like this cuts across departments, and exactly what Eric said, like who you think might be a laggard or a late majority, you're going to be surprised, right? When you see when people say, wow, how did you do that quickly? How did you get those results? How did you get evidence to justify a decision this early before you even had any revenue, right? And so the people coming out of the woodwork are just the next stack on the adoption curve. So there's a lot of great comments here. I want to see if we can address some of these. One of them was about risk, and so Lean Startup is a great way of taking more risk, and that's an interesting comment. I mean, I don't disagree with it. I think one of the things that, and I think I've shared this story before, but a couple years ago, I had a senior executive who is looking to start an innovation program at a very large company. We all have this company's products in our houses right now. And he said, Ben, I'm trying to get this Lean Startup thing going, but I just can't get my executive, my C-suite to take more risk. They're just not willing to take more risk. And I said, well, if you think about it, most companies say they're risk averse, but in fact, they're engaging in the most risk-taking behavior imaginable. which is coming up with really big ideas and then funding them for $100 million, like we've been talking about, right? Like that is like going to Vegas and betting your family nest egg, on blackjack or something, right? That is incredibly risky. That does not sound risk averse to me. And so, we worked with that person to say, look, frame it in the right way, which is lean startup is about taking less risk. If you're already making these big risky bets, it's about, containing the cost of failure. It's about learning early instead of wasting all your time and money building something that nobody wants. And so I guess, Eric, any thoughts on
Sure, yeah.
lean startup and taking risk?
Yeah, risk is an interesting word because everyone who studied finance knows that risk and reward are correlated. But can you imagine if I sold if you imagine I was a financial product I was selling, and I only talked about the risk and not the reward, it would have no buyers. In fact, the problem we have is people talk too much about the reward and they don't talk about the risk.
Yeah.
And as a result, companies wind up as Ben saying, taking risks that they don't realize that they're taking. And they do it even when they have a really strong compliance department. That's what's so funny. It's like I work with a bunch of companies where compliance is everything on lockdown. So everyone's got to do everything exactly the way compliance says. And of course, the problem with making compliance the epicenter of your company is that the least risky, like the perception anyway, from the legal perspective, is the way to avoid any kind of risk. The least risky thing to do is to just do nothing. If you do nothing, then you won't have any compliance problems. You'll have other problems soon enough, but like not this quarter. And since most companies run quarter to quarter, is what happens. But the problem is, even if you do that, even if you run stage gate and you do everything through compliance, even if you just have the lowest risk, most conservative management system possible,
you
run quarter to quarter. The problem is now there are two kinds of projects that the company can do. There are projects that can be done in one quarter and then other. And the problem is the pressure amps up for projects to get into the other bucket, because at some level the company knows that it has to do stuff. Like if you can't get anything done through normal channels, then people start to try to get things done through irregular channels. So like you look at these companies where like the innovation people are pulling their hair out because they can't get a $5,000 check run, to approve to get an experiment. And then they'll wake up one day and read in the newspaper that the company's invested $300 million in some crazy wild ass scheme to go do cryptocurrency, whatever. And they're like, could you have invested $297 million in this obviously money-losing crazy venture and given me the $3 million? I could have done a lot done for $3 million. I only wanted $5,000,
Yeah.
So the problem with other is if the company's risk management, compliance, accountability system is geared up for things that are predictable, that happen in short time horizons, we don't have the muscle. We literally do not have the capacity, the skill. We don't know how to hold people accountable to an innovation type venture. And that's where the risk gets out of control. So that's where you see these companies spend hundreds or millions of dollars or like billions of dollars and take catastrophic losses. And a big part of lean startup is just don't do that. Or if you're going to do that, could we have 10% of the money to invest in this more disciplined way? And, and I'm speaking of this colloquially, when I do this with finance, compliance, legal, and their bosses, we work through the math of innovation accounting to be like, look, I'm not just BSing you here. Like, we're very serious about liability containment. We're very serious about risk mitigation. We're very serious about being in, and what they call alpha, right? Like, you want to be in the sweet spot of your financial portfolio of optimal risk versus reward. We have that same kind of concept, but for the portfolio of work that companies do. And so it can get pretty rigorous. Obviously we're not going to get into that now because some people on this call probably would die of boredom. We don't want that to happen. But if you want to learn more, reach out. We're happy to get into those mechanics too.
Yeah. It's so there's some comments in here about, middle managers. I don't know if, they're the problem or whatever, but and sometimes
people. Have you talked to a middle manager today? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And it like, and we all kind of, we'll throw other groups under the bus, right? Brand and legal and whoever, right? But
whoever's not in the room at the time you do the event.
Exactly. It's the proverbial they, right? They won't let us do it. But I guess what we found is that, a big part, by the way, we don't talk enough about lean startup mindset, right? That's a big part of what we do in our workshops and our pilot programs. Like, what's the mindset that you have to have? Because if you don't have that mindset, then all the tools don't matter, right? If you're just checking boxes on build, measure, learn because somebody told you to do it, don't do it at all. It's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
But basically, having empathy for those middle managers and for legal and brand, because they're doing their job, right? They got hired to protect the brand, to protect the company from risk. And so one of the things that we recommend is go out and talk to them, invite them to the workshop and say, here's why we're doing this. We're in the business of reducing risk for this company. Is that what you're doing as well, Mr. or Mrs. Legal, like the person in brand? Like what? Yeah, that's what we're doing. Okay, great. Well, the reason we want to run experiments is so that we don't have a big public humiliation where we waste $100 million. We want to contain the risk, and we want to make sure that we can test things up front. Does that sound good? Yeah. Okay. Now, how would we do that? Right. And so involving those people in the conversation.
Yeah, don't do it at the 11th hour. That's the classic innovative thing, is to like wait until it's, literally tomorrow morning we're launching the thing. And it's like, oh, did anyone check with legal? I better call them. And it's, it's 10 p.m. It's like, hey, I don't mean to interrupt you, but do you mind reviewing this 5,000 page plan? And, it's like, oh, sure. When do you need it by? 6 a.m. tomorrow. It's like
game over.
Yeah. F you. I'll give you one funny story. You reminded me of that when you're talking about it. I was working with the product team, and they wanted to, they had a plan. This is like classic thing that I used to get brought into all the time. The company's going to is an American company doing an international launch of their product. And so they decided they're going to spend 18 months and $20 million localizing the product for, 25 countries and languages, and then do a simultaneous global international launch in all those places, because everywhere is exactly like America. So, that localization is basically just translation. It's just like, okay, of course, it's already 9 months into the plan when they bring me. I never get to be in these things at the beginning. If I'm being brought in by somebody, it's usually like, okay, we already have the team's like super anxious. What's going to happen? So we're talking about, we do a lead startup workshop. We work through what's the MVP that we could do here. And because of the politics of the situation, they're like, look, we can't change this plan. It is a decree from on high that this must happen, but we're really nervous that it might not work. So it's like, okay, well, what can we do to double check in advance that this plan is going to work, so that we can fine tune? I think about, like, we're calling in airstrikes, $20 million worth of airstrikes. We're going up on TV ads and whatever, and they're all going to land in this place, 18 months from now. It's like, well, why don't we send a few special forces, advanced scouts, to make sure that that's where you want the missiles to land. It's like, before we go blasting off to stuff, let's just go double check that we know what country we're supposed to be in, and we know what we're doing here. Okay. And this is like, everyone's really nervous. So it's like, okay, so we're working on this experiment. I got the team, literally sit the team in a conference room, big conference room in a fancy office, and whatever, get the Polycom and the whole thing and the Aeron chairs, and we're just like, okay, what could we do? And so finally we work out an MVP as follows. Why don't we go find one of the countries where there's some level of English-speaking customers in that country? And we run Google ads right now. It says, if you pre-order the, I don't remember, a German edition of the software in 9 months, you get the English version today for free. Put in your credit card and, give us your $100.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, oh yeah, that'd be a great idea. Because if we can't get any customers for that, we probably have a problem. So we should, probably that. We'll have some customers. We can talk to those customers. We can learn about the different. Turns out, did you know that like the kinds of software they buy in, rural India is like really different than in, Sweden, right? Like just like, well, oh yeah, I guess so. So like, and certain countries, they have indigenous competitors and others they don't. I mean, the situation is very fraught. And we're doing really well. We're going to do it. I'm like, okay, so we're going to go do this experiment. Like, right. I was like, let's just do it right now. While you wait in this conference room right now, we could be on Google. We could make this landing page ourselves. No, we don't need to have 400 more meetings about it. Let's go. And finally, someone's like, oh, hold on. This sounds great, but legal will never allow it. I'm like, what? They're like, yeah. Oh, everyone's like, oh, right. Legal said we can't do something. Really? Legal said that? Okay. Who said that? I'm like, what do you mean who? Is there a Mr. Legal who works at this company? Like, oh no, it's something that everybody knows.
Yeah.
It's like, I understand, but does legal have a name? Does somebody work in the legal department? They're like, everyone's looking around like, what is this guy talking about? No, everyone knows legal. I said, look, do me a favor. Who is the legal decision maker for this? Does the person have a name? And they're like, literally, they're like, I don't know. Is he in the employee directory? Like, and someone's like, they were working it out, like they're thinking really hard. Like, I guess it would be the chief legal officer of our division as a GC. I guess it would be him. I'm like, okay, does he have a name? Oh yeah, Mr. So-and-so. Okay. Is he in the company directory? Yeah. You have his phone number? Yeah. Let's call him. Got fancy Polycom right here on the desk. Yeah. Push the button and type in. They're like looking at me like mouth agape, like you got to be kidding me. He's a horrible monster who hates our guts. I'm like, I know, but you said legal said.
Yeah.
But no one's asked him, so let's go ask him. So I Polycom. They dial in. The team's like, he picks up. The team's like, oh, excuse me, Mr. Legal. Do you mind if we can do an experiment with uncontained liability where we might take people's credit card for a product that will never ship? Would that be okay? And he's like, how dare you suggest? And I'm like, oh, sorry, Mr. Legal. I think these guys misunderstood. We misexplained what they're doing. Do you mind if we go do these pre-orders to do? It's just I give the spiel that you just gave about just in order to reduce the risk of future problems.
Yeah.
We'll limit it only to 100 customers. And he's like, what is the retail value of this product? It's like it's only $19.99. He's like doing the math in his head. He's like, do you realize that you have wasted more money than that just having this phone call with me? Slams the phone down, and everyone's like, see, and then one of the people was like, wait, guys, I think he just said yes. I think that's actually permission to do it. And they were like shocked. He was rude and yelled at them, but he actually was like, it's fine. Like, what are you wasting my time with this for? Of course, he would spend $2,000. I don't care. And not only was that transformation for that team, we did the experiment. We found out, but by the way, we found out that their plan was totally borked and they were in big trouble and they really needed to pivot. Shocker. But that same GC called me afterwards and he's like, I'm really intrigued by this thing. I heard from my boss that we're doing this lean startup thing. Like, tell me more about it. And we worked together on, he's like, I'd like to have guidelines for teams so they know when they're allowed to experiment or not. Because I find it so frustrating that they don't call. He was rude, but he was actually very pleased to get the phone call before it was too late. And so we actually literally we used the fact that people were terrified to call legal as a carrot in the design of the program. And it was like, look, we literally produced a 1-page document. The first draft, by the way, the 1-page document the lawyer sent me was 10 pages, but we got it down to 1 page.
Yeah.
And it was like, look, here are the 3 situations you might be in. In situation number 1, as long as you follow these rules, you don't have to call legal. You're pre-approved. In situation 2, you have to get a senior executive to sign off, but you don't. And situation 3 is call the hotline. And then legal became, instead of being a gatekeeper that's slowing people down, an enabler of experimental speed. Because now teams would get the 1-pager and they'd be like, I want to do the fancy thing where I ship 1 million copies and I don't want to do experimentation, whatever. And then someone would be like, oh, but if we do that, that's bucket 3. And we have to call legal. And they'd be like, oh, what's in bucket 1? It's like, well, if we only have 100 customers and it's contained this way and we do the MVP and whatever, then we don't have to call anybody. So let's do that one. So now we're starting to create a desire in the company that was very helpful.
Yeah, it's awesome. And it's just it's an example of the proverbial they, go explain it to them. Work with them. So we only have a couple minutes left, and I'm going to weave together 2 comments that seem like they are very different from each other. One person asked us, have we ever worked with any public libraries? LOL. And then the next question was from, I've lost my spot here, was from Isaiah. Can you discuss the typical profile that we work with, of a company that we work with in deploying a lean startup system? So,
I'll do the first, you do the second. I've never worked with a public library per se, but we've worked with a lot of civic infrastructure and public sector stuff over the years. Universities, governments, local governments, municipal governments, federal governments. We worked on international, strategic partnership alliances between countries and all kinds of crazy stuff. So, as bureaucratic, and people used to complain to me that I used to work with Fortune 500 companies. They'd be like, oh, my company's horribly bureaucratic and political. And I'd be like, more political and bureaucratic than the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, the Department of HHS, the federal government. They'd be like, no, then if they can do it, probably you can do it too. And so we've seen a lot of that stuff. And I'll never forget, I did an event once with a defense-oriented government agency that's very secretive. And they brought me in, the security was incredibly tight, and it was very spooky actually. And the teams that I met there were just ordinary startup teams, except that the mission that they're on, when they say something's mission critical, people die. It's actually super high stakes. Anyway, we did that event, and then that evening I was doing a big that was a private event just for them. And then I did a public event, and a bunch of the people from that agency were at the public event. I could see them in the audience, they were all just hanging out. And I do my talk and whatever, and I asked for questions, and I got one of those people raised their hand, and I'm like, well, and the person's like, excuse me, I work at a medium-sized not-for-profit organization with a very hierarchical, executive command. It was just like the most hilarious description of the thing. And I guess I'm not like, am I supposed to say that I know this person? I know where they work? Like, probably not.
Yeah.
But like, I say that as it was funny because like their question was like the same. These issues are the same. The context changes because in a public library, our mission is different than it would be for a for-profit company. So of course, the purpose of the organization is different, but the issues of like the management system and the incentive design and the kind of the way we go about making change, like those issues are universal. And so, yeah, we've seen it in a lot of odd corners of the world economy.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, so no, I haven't worked with the public library personally, but we always get the question, have you worked with this industry or that company or this, and we've worked with a lot of them now, which is really cool, right? I mean, we like the coverage of Lean Startup is pretty amazing. What I would say is that as long as you have customers and you have some kind of new type of value that you're looking at building or delivering, this applies, right? And so this little diagram here, that what's so great about it is that this could be, a couple executives and a couple of teams at a Fortune 100 company. It could also be at a mom and pop pizza stand, right? Like it still applies. And so it's a very scalable framework. And so there is no pattern, Isaiah, because as Eric said, the issues that people are facing are very, very similar. So I think we are out of time. Look at that. Wow, an hour goes by very, very quickly. I did want to do just a quick shout out here. So just for those of you that might not have heard about it, Eric has a new course, the Lean Startup Online course. There, Chris, look at you. And so if you're interested in learning more about this, you can head out to our website. It's leanstartup.co. And we have a lot of resources out on our website. I'll give you some links to that in just a second. Here we go. So we're here to serve, right? So we've got our new course that, from Eric. We've got a new ebook that we came out with over the summer. If you're interested in our previous event recordings, they're all out on the website, plus a lot of other stuff, tools, articles. And if you're just interested in learning more about Lean Startup Co., no pressure. If you want to have an informational meeting with me, just shoot us an email on info@leanstartup.co. You can DM me on LinkedIn, or if you're one of those QR people that can scan something really quickly, you can grab that QR code and schedule some time with me. So, Eric, any parting comments?
I just want to say thanks, everybody. Have happy holidays, and as you're thinking about 2024, I hope those of you who have the courage to try something new will keep us posted. Let us know how it's going. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you so much for attending. Happy holidays. Thank you.
Take care.